Hi, everybody. This is Kyle Costco, Director of Marketing at Construction Users Roundtable. Thank you for joining us for one of our first breakout sessions of the 2021 CURT National Conference. The way it'll work is we will watch the presentation and case study from Dave Roeder from Procter & Gamble, and then we will open it up to some question and answers once the presentation concludes. Feel free to message me in the chat if you have any questions. And I will be watching the chat box to ask the questions once the presentation concludes. And I will also put my email and phone number in the chat box as well if you have any questions or comments after the presentation is over. All right, thank you and enjoy.
Good afternoon. My name is Dave Roeder, and I work for the Procter & Gamble company in Oxnard, California. Today, I'm going to present the Optimus project, an optimal case study. First, a little about Procter & Gamble in Oxnard. This is a P&G paper products plant for the last 48 years. It is one of 6 family care paper sites in North America. We produce both Charmin toilet paper and Bounty paper towels. Production is in the tens of millions of cases per year, and we operate 24/7, about 360 days a year. A little about myself. I have a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering from UW-Madison. I was a summer intern and full hire now with P&G for 30 years. I've worked in 5 of our plants in central engineering, and I've resided in Southern California for the last 8 years, and for the last 4, I've actually worked in the Oxnard plant. My role has covered all facets of engineering, from layout to mechanical to electrical, process, programming, project management, technology development, and delivery and startup. Now provide a little background on the project itself. The finished product handling system in Oxnard a few years ago was a traditional central FPH system. It was staffed with 23 P&G employees. We had 6 converting lines that fed 8 palletizers of 3 major equipment types, most of which was 90s technology. It included the typical sortation, laning, accumulation systems, and also had a lot of numerous one-of-a-kind and some last technologies. The opportunity was to install end-of-line palletization directly at the packing equipment. We have this in other plants and on other lines, and it was something that we've moved to in the last number of years. By integrating all this FPH equipment, we would have the operating team for the converting lines then operate and maintain it. Little on the transformation now. So what was the plan? We were going to install 4 new and 1 relocated close-coupled FPH systems at the end of each converting line. This included palletizers, stretch wrappers, stackers, and conveyors for both full case and pallet. All of this would be fairly standard equipment. The installations would look the same, and all of the processes when we're done would be very identical. We would deliver pallets through additional autonomous guided vehicles from palletizer, as well as having some direct truck line connections that would go out into our distribution center. When we were done, then we would site clear all of the current FPH equipment and convert that area to material and finished product storage. The metrics, this was a reduction of 31 people in total, 23 P&G and 8 contractors. It would just result in a $5 million annual expense savings, and we would have to do this by funding a $6 million capital project. Going to talk about execution, but let me come back to that later. First, I'll jump to the results. So from a safety standpoint, we had 0 incidents with about 40,000 effort hours. We had a few near misses and a couple of first aid cases along the way. Quality, once again, 0 incidents. We ended up with improved process capability throughout, some due to the new equipment, some due to just the reduced amount of conveyor that we had in the system. Overall schedule, we delivered 5 major and 3 minor startups around major shipping events over the course of 16 months. From a cost standpoint, we delivered 100% of the base scope at the stretch goal. Overall savings, we delivered 95% of that in year 1. We still have a small amount of work on the follow-up list to do to complete the rest of that committed savings. And overall, from a process reliability standpoint, our measure at month 2, we were successful on 4 of the 5 lines, and from an overall standpoint on the total project. Cover some of the keys to success, which basically how we executed this project. First thing I'll cover is talking about gaining alignment. Then I'm going to talk about our base P&G engineering process. And the reason that's important is to understand the next one, which then is how we went through construction planning and the use of lean IPD. Get a little more into the overall execution, talk some of the base system work processes we used, stewardship, in other words, keeping control of the dollars, which was obviously very important. And finally, talk one of the last ones, which is one of the most important, which is the key enabler for the overall project. All right, gaining alignment. I think everybody's done this before, a lot of pre-work. Layout, scope, definition, strategies, that turns into alignment. You have reviews with the plant, you have walkthroughs, which then goes back to refining that work with better layouts, more detailed scope, better strategies, very iterative process. Then we get into the realignment, deeper reviews with the hierarchy, tours, people want to understand what the work is. But overall, that process, this is a lot of converge, diverge, converge, get aligned. In this case, it took us 9 months to get everybody on the same page. Second thing, P&G engineering. We've had a traditional process, and I've been around this company obviously a long time. We do a lot of engineering, we do a lot of design, we review that, we go back, we do more engineering, more detailed design, review that, and it's only then that we go out and issue EIs. So that's the engineering information to actually go out and do the work. And some projects, those are not only lengthy, but also very numerous. We send out bids, try and get lump sum proposals. We do a lot of T&M work as well, but obviously on bigger projects like this, we are looking for lump sums. We purchase equipment, we purchase that construction, and then we begin to work issues. When are we going to do this? When's the downtime? How do we fit this into the schedule? Where are we going to source things from? So there's a lot of control, I would say, from the P&G side, where we're trying to manage a lot of this with the construction company. Finally, we do get to construct. We go through that outage, we do the upgrade, whatever it is. But oftentimes we're back doing more re-engineering, more redesign, reissuing of documents because of things that we might have missed or that we had not seen in the first place. Those obviously lead to change orders, other modifications. Bottom line, when it came to this project, the category said, hold on, we need to look at a different process. And at first it was obviously very different for us because this is something that we've done for many, many years. And that process was lean IPD. So integrated project development, definitely newer to P&G, obviously not to industry, but it was something that we needed to understand. How can we do this and how can we adapt to this capability? So the first thing we did was we interviewed Spirit Construction to gauge their interest. The reason it was Spirit is because they've done work for us before. They were on our list to bid, and we thought they would be a good candidate for it. Believe it or not, they came back and said, yes, we want to do it. We want to go through this with you. And so it was great. So then we hired them to do a CDS session, a collaborative design session. And the reason we hired them was we wanted to make it clear that we weren't committed to them yet, but that we also wanted to pay them for their time and their effort and make sure that we got a good product coming out of it. To be able to gauge how we would do this overall project. We reviewed the scope, developed estimates separately, spent a couple of weeks prior to meeting and then actually met for an entire week here at the plant to go through the details, talk about the strategies and go through all of the scope in a lot of detail. Did a lot of defining, a lot of refining, and then we aligned basically on that overall effort and an overall target dollar value for the project. Which was very important. So in doing that, we also had to develop needs both ways, in what we call conditions of satisfaction. And that was everything from safety to quality to cost, schedule, needs in terms of drawings and information and overall expectations. One of the most important things we did to make sure that we were completely aligned. Coming out of that, it was then basically aligned to an incentive-based contract. So, this was the real key for us, is that we wanted to have shared savings on this project. Basically broke the PO up into 3 parts. There was a direct T&M. So as they did the work, they were billing us at their direct T&M costs without profit. There was also a contingency pot, which we agreed to was about 10% of the overall effort, and a separate pot of money, which was their profit. So the overall intent being that if they did the work and it worked perfectly, they do all the T&M work, get billed for that. They would bill us for all their profit later, and we take the contingency and we'd split that money. Okay. And that is actually what we did in the long run. We did spend some of the contingency in terms of finishing up some work, but we did share a large portion of that. But that obviously led then to a $4.5 million contract, and one that was put in place 6 months ahead of the start of construction. Okay, that's where we began the partnership. And that important piece is that was 6 months ahead. On a typical project, we're usually getting construction contracts in place 1 to 2 months ahead of time, which is often more difficult because it's getting resources aligned and getting the schedule defined. Sometimes it's very hard to do. So having this well ahead of time made this much easier to plan. All right, execute. There were a number of things that we did over the course of the project to make it go smoothly. Obviously, the most important one was the critical path schedule. P&G developed this, but we managed it jointly with Spirit Construction. Something we met on every week. We went through around equipment deliveries. We went through pre-work. We went through outages. We looked at staffing, and we matched that staffing to the schedule. And then we also matched the schedule to the staffing. So it's very important that when people were here, we wanted to utilize them full time. We wanted to make sure there was always work to be done and that they weren't having to send people back and get other people at the last minute. Fortunately, early layouts drove the construction pre-work. So a big piece of this was making sure that we could install as much equipment as we could in green space before we actually had to do tie-in work later on in the project. But overall, we ended up with 12 total days of line downtime across the 6 lines because we were able to put a lot of that work, put a lot of that equipment in places where there was nothing else, or that we could site clear old equipment ahead of time. But all of that effort then was in many different phases. I mean, not only do you have the construction, but then we had PSI and startup on lines. We were doing hand feeding. We were doing process definition and validating as much stuff as we could ahead. Then, and only then, did we do the tie-in. And by doing that tie-in after we had completed most of that, we were able to get to full production within days to minimize the overall production impact to the site. And realize that all of this was being done across multiple lines in different phases at the same time. So while we were constructing in one, we were PSIing and hand feeding in another, and we were actually doing a tie-in and startup on another one. So bottom line, it required a lot of integration, a lot of communication, and a lot of collaboration between construction, engineering, and operations at the site. Okay, what were some of the base systems that we utilized? First one, obviously, safety. Every day, doing daily STAs in the morning, safety huddles after lunch, BOS observations were being done by construction, by P&G. Making sure that what we were doing and focusing on the important things, the PPE, the gloves, the lift safety, barricades, fire permits, those were the most important things. And we addressed that stuff every single day. Quality, very important. Daily walkthroughs. So, the P&G side, the construction side, we would get together regularly, but we would also get together at a moment's notice if necessary to go address an issue. We wanted to make sure that what we were doing was right the first time, and that if there was an issue, that they would ask for clarification right away before going ahead and doing something that we might have to undo later. Engineering design. Obviously with Lean IPD, we reduced the amount of engineering drastically, but we still had to do enough design drawings for things like platform, structural, electrical power distribution. But 99% of that effort was design drawings that were needed. Okay. And then one of the other things, just organizational design for winning. So we made sure that we had the right technical skills at the right moment when they were needed, that we had the right people at the right place to not only support construction, but support startup. And once again, coming back to that detailed critical path schedule that we could work off of from a daily and weekly basis. Stewardship. So the first thing is, obviously, this was a savings project. It did not have an unlimited amount of money, obviously. And so one of the things that we were pushing was capital scarcity. Capital dollars, we trended all the way down to the PO level, so that we knew when we were spending money, we knew how much money that we had, and we made sure that we were keeping track of all of the dollars. We had a very rigid change management process for anything, for engineering changes, for other trends, and using best value option analysis whenever we had to look at different components. We also utilize a number of unused assets across our category. So there were AGVs, there were conveyors, but there were hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment that was free to us on the project to be able to reuse. And then obviously the lean IPD effort. We wanted to make sure we were staffing to the schedule and scheduling to the staffing. And that was very important throughout. We did have some wins. We saved a lot of money. As I mentioned, conveyors, $250,000. We saved $100,000 by integrating the platforms into the overall construction scope. There were some other small things, but then there were also just lean IPD. We probably saved about $400,000 between construction and engineering from what we originally planned in the estimate. There were also headwinds though. We had other ECAs, flooring work that we needed to do. Turns out we needed an additional new AGV. There was pricing that we hadn't planned on, commodity, steel prices, Rockwell pricing, all of that went up since we funded. Turns out the AGV programming ended up being a lot more than we expected. And there were sprinklers that we had to actually go back and add that we hadn't planned for originally. Finally, key enabler, the people. Okay, this is one of the most important things. Early on, a lot of manufacturing involvement. We went out to the operations, made sure we got the right people, got the right input, so that we knew that when we did those reviews that we were doing something that was going to get a lot of support early on. There was a lot of culture change, okay, both in the plant, from not only from an operations standpoint, but also from a lean IPD standpoint. So that was a completely different process that we had to adapt to very quickly to understand how do we make this work. Platform standardization. There is an entire platform group that supports us in the central organization, getting their buy-in to this process and this change, as well as a number of upgrades to today's latest controls, was very important and something that we worked very quickly and got them integrated into. We also required a strong training plan. We needed to do a lot of training with people as we relocated them to different parts of the business, and utilizing LFDs, learn from experience from one line to the next. There's no doubt that when we got to the third and fourth lines, or even fifth lines in terms of startup, they went much, much smoother because of the effort we put in on the first couple and understanding what to do and what not to do. But finally, the seamless technical community. There were 40 P&G people that were heavily involved in this project, meaning they spent normally weeks of time, some of them way more than others, at our site helping support the work that we were doing. So it took an entire group of people to make this happen. And that was the number one thing, getting the right people involved, doing the collaboration, the partnership, and making all of that happen.
So thank you, Dave, for your presentation. Learned a lot of great stuff. Before I open it up to any questions and answers, Dave, is there anything that you would like to highlight before we start taking questions?
Yeah, this 20-minute presentation was it's kind of a drop in the bucket almost in terms of the effort that I spent over the last 2 years, along with another group of key people at the site here, to make this project happen. So, obviously I'd love to share a bunch of pictures, layouts, videos. I tried to share just a few things that we thought we could share with the community here in terms of what we did. But it really was, as I look back, it was just a major change from how we executed projects. And 2 years ago, started learning about lean IPD even before we did the project, but never once considered that we would be able to execute something like that for what we call a technical project. We've done many of them in the building of offices, of different projects like that I'd heard about. But when it came to a technology project, replacing a bunch of palletizers, this is the kind of stuff we do all the time. We had never approached that. So it was, how do we do this? And, that whole piece of sitting around on a whiteboard, just saying, well, how would we make this happen? It was a lot of learning on the go. But the biggest thing that we realized that was so impactful was that change in the process. No longer did I need to go and execute, weeks and months worth of engineering ahead of time before I could go out and issue something for bid, because that's often what we get so stuck in from an overall engineering process, is that effort. Now, we knew a lot of the equipment we were going to buy. We said, here's the overall concept. Went out and worked that then and said, we basically started with a layout. I mean, that was the first thing that we reviewed with the construction company, and that was it. Here's the layout. Here's and kind of a scope list. Here are the, call it 25 things we need to do on this project. And then we did a tour and we walked it. And fortunately, Spirit Construction has done some of this work for us before, so it wasn't totally unknown to them. But it became, okay, we understand it, we estimated it, and then we asked them, what do you want? I mean, you've seen our EIs before, and they're, they kind of said, well, we don't need a whole lot of that. What we really need is we need a detailed layout with dimensions. We need some power distribution drawings, and we just need the manuals that come with the equipment and or, a few other minor things. And it was like, that made my life so much easier, because doing that level of detail is probably 10% of what I might do on a typical engineering project for something like this. So that was where the real power came in, and that's why we were able to save so much money from a engineering standpoint. Probably, more than half of what we would normally spend, we were able to save on this project.
Great. Dave, there's one question that entered the chat box. Do you have a lean IPD roadmap that the team followed as you worked through the process?
The roadmap that I do, I didn't share that detail, but it was, we actually took what we had from the company that we were just learning at the time, and we basically picked pieces of that roadmap and said, well, how do we do this? The whole idea of partner selection, that piece we didn't even read about until after we had selected the partner. But when it came to things like the collaborative design session, having a big room, which we ended up getting, having construction get a trailer so that we could have our schedules on the wall, have all of our, daily and weekly activities. There were a number of those components that we looked at. And then obviously the whole piece about the contract itself. I mean, how to do that. I'll share another interesting tidbit. This was a $16 million project. It was a $5 million construction project. For a site like this, that's a big project. We do one of those probably every 3 or 4 years, maybe here. So it doesn't happen a lot. Most of our projects are in the $100,000 to $1 million range that I work on over time. But as we worked with purchasing, it was interesting that purchasing saw that as a very small contract. And I get that. I mean, our purchasing group, does $100 million brand new sites, but our project was very small. And so it was hard at times to even get them to commit to wanting to do this type of an effort, because to them it was a much, much smaller thing. I looked at it as, well, this is a $5 million construction contract. If I can save hundreds of thousands of dollars, that is a big deal, because you're getting into the the 5 and 10% kind of thing. So I think that what we did is not far off from what you can find on industry with some of those things about the lean IPD model, which integrated project delivery. Somehow when I was watching, I noticed I said development in there during the presentation, so wanted to key on that. So hopefully that helps.
And then a follow-up question: did you use any type of lean consultant or third party to help you through the process?
We started with a consultant. So we have an on-site construction company who's floor construction. They had somebody that had done, not on the site, but somebody that had done work within their company, and they did help navigate us through that first, call it, couple weeks of getting started. So it was interesting that we really, we took a lot of this on our own for a couple of reasons. One, it was kind of last minute. I mean, we were the first major project within the category that they said, hey, we really want to go look at lean IPD. And the same thing, I asked, 100 questions. And as I did that, I realized we haven't done this. We don't really know. So a lot of it was within call it our liberty, the liberties that we had to take to try and figure it out ourselves. So some of that was good because we weren't trying to follow an exact model, but it was also difficult because there was a lot of questions and trying to ask the right people and understand how we should do this. Versus I look at it today, and we've got dozens of major projects going on around the category, and they are using portions of Lean IPD on those same projects. Now, what's interesting is what we've realized is some projects adapt themselves well to Lean IPD, others do not. And it really depends on what the project is, how it can be executed, the type of equipment. So there are different levels to that. That was one of the reasons when we started, when Lean IPD was get every contractor in on the single contract. And as we thought about that, we said, well, we have equipment contractors, we have engineering, we have construction. And we also have local construction. So it wasn't just our local construction couldn't handle a job this big very easily. So that's why we wanted to go outside. But as we decided, each one of those, the equipment, we said, we know what we're buying. A lot of this is P&G standard specs. There's no reason to do anything different there. From an engineering standpoint, the same thing. It was not well documented how we should do this and how to do those splits. So it became, let's keep engineering separate. So it ended up being just P&G and the construction contractor. But we are now doing other Lean IPD efforts where we've got multiple parties besides P&G involved because it makes sense and there can be more definition up front. So it was a learn by the seat of our pants kind of thing as we went.
Perfect. There's more questions coming in, so thanks for everybody who's asking. Continue to ask away. The next question, for the amount that engineering effort was reduced, what types of documents were not produced that normally would be?
The biggest thing and it's not that we didn't do any necessary engineering. So if we needed to do the engineering from a design standpoint, we did that. But 99% of what we created from an engineering standpoint were design drawings, okay? Typically, the engineering process creates documents that are issued to support how to do things, okay? And it was the how to do that we got rid of. And don't get me wrong, the how to do, we probably spend more than 50% of our engineering dollars creating those how to do documents. So meaning, in those documents, they will have attachments, they will have references, I mean, everything, and they just talk about all kinds of things from how to lock the systems out to everything. And that was the stuff that we decided to get rid of. So a pile of paper, for a project this size, our pile of paper from actual drawings was probably less than half an inch thick. If we did this the traditional method, I could have probably piled something up that was 8, 10, 12 inches deep on my desk in terms of overall documents. And I've done those before where we've done this magnitude of work. But what you find is you give a contractor 8, 10, 12 inches worth of paper to review, they're not reading a whole lot. I mean, all they do is they want to go right to the drawings and say, show me the layout, show me the details, they'll figure it out. And that's what we've realized over the years, that those that the amount of value that you get out of 90% of that is extremely low. Now, there were pieces that construction came back and asked, especially around things like lockout. Can we get the lockout list? Absolutely. But that was then something we worked on together. And especially, it wasn't so much for the new equipment. That was very easy. It was a lot of for the old equipment. We had to go out and figure out what are we locking out. And that was a joint walk between myself, for David that worked for me, and engineering that was on site, and construction. And we'd actually go through in detail and verify that we had the right things prior to de-energizing and locking out a system.
All right, the next question is, was an engineering consultant used, or was engineering completed by P&G? How did the engineering team and construction team go about estimating to develop the target value?
Well, the engineering team, there really wasn't a target. We used a contractor. It's a P&G contractor that we use regularly. So it's an on-site contractor. They're part of a partnership that we have ongoing. But that was based, we estimated that just, kind of rule of thumb that we use on any typical project. But when it came to the construction estimate, that was the one that was the whole part of, how do we do this differently? Of course, P&G, had its own estimate. So I was involved early on before the funding, had other people helping. We reviewed that a lot. We looked at the work we were doing. We compared that to similar jobs. So the typical process that we would use. But when it came to the actual work and we got Spirit involved, and some of that previous data was from Spirit doing other jobs, putting these in other plants and from past history. But then we asked them to do that estimate as well. And the thing that was smart was we didn't just give them a blank slate. We said, here's the 25 scope blocks that we think is the right thing to go estimate from, so that it matched what we had. And we asked them to put material and hours towards that. And that was what a lot of that initial effort was, so that they could feel comfortable with it. And then we looked at the two, and what we found was they were within plus or minus 25% probably, which wasn't bad. But interestingly, even though we had some things that were 25% high, we also had things that were 25% low, from my standpoint. So where we thought it would spend, $50,000 to do something, they were saying, no, we could do this for $25,000. And those were the ones that we talked about, and we walked and said, well, what would you do different here? And, they said, well, we talked a lot about how to support things more off the floor versus off the ceiling. But, we're in Southern California, so everything has to be structurally designed. So, when it came to the structural engineering, who we used even a different contractor for that does stuff just for the site, their estimate actually went over because, we actually had that a little bit light because everything that's being done, and we were doing some of that structural engineering based on construction's feedback for how they'd like to do something. Overall, worked great. But still the effort to do that took more than what we thought. But that was because when we started, we were thinking we would have the construction company or the engineering company doing the structural design, do all of this detail, and then make sure that construction followed it. And we did a little bit of that, but we also did some give and take back and forth. But in the long run, a much, much better product and overall process to make it happen, because we could do that detailed design only when construction needed it. I didn't have to do every single bit of it prior to getting the contracts done.
Okay. What do you think you saved in cost or a percentage getting a partner on board from the start versus traditional bidding process, engineering savings and schedule?
From a schedule standpoint, it's hard to say that how we saved it, but bottom line, we hit the schedule. So that was a big thing, is that we had a schedule out there when we funded the project. And other than delaying something in the following year so that we weren't doing a startup over Christmas and we pushed something into January, we hit the schedule we had planned. So that was great. As far as the engineering and construction dollars, we probably saved, that 400,000 over 4.8 million, it was 7 or 8% that we saved. And the good thing about this was when we funded this project, I didn't get into it, but the typical rate of return, the company would like to see is somewhere around 15%. We didn't quite have enough savings from a total cost standpoint to fund at 15% rate of return. But the company also knew this was a huge driver. It was a huge savings project for the category and probably the biggest one we had 2 years ago. And so we needed to get it funded. So we actually cut down from what we call our typical stretch goal to even stretch further. At the time, we called it our team challenge. So that was another $800,000 or $900,000 that we took off and said, if we fund for this amount, then we will hit 15%. Okay. It's not by the letter of the law in terms of how they want to see it, but everybody agreed, well, if you can drive towards that by cutting out even more money for the funding, we'll support it. So when we went in, we actually had some defined scope that wasn't even funded. So the only way we could do that was actually to cut out more money. And that was part of why the lean IPD effort came in, and that everybody gravitated to it quickly and said, hey, that's another part by doing lean IPD is another chance that we can get at this team challenge. And it wasn't just that, it was using more used equipment. I made trips to a couple of the other plants because I knew there was equipment out there that people had taken out, were getting ready to throw out. And, I said, I want this, I want to save that. Got hundreds of feet of full case conveyor from one plant. We got, about 50 to 60 feet of pallet conveyor and pallet equipment, handling equipment that we could simply reuse, put new controls on and upgrade. And all of that became the overall process to how to make that happen. And the great part about that was we simply threw those things on the layout, made that part of the inventory in terms of the equipment, and Spirit basically took that and in some cases could put it in directly. In other cases, we had to modify legs, shorten them or lengthen them in order to fit the application that we had. But that became instead of having a document that was multiple pages long on what they had to modify, construction was able to look at it and understand, well, we got a top of elevation at 30 inches. We just need to modify this equipment and make it happen. So it was a much more collaborative partnership as we went through all those details instead of creating these engineering documents.
Great. What do you think is the biggest roadblock of using lean IPD for a manufacturing process upgrade project like this?
From a roadblock standpoint, I don't know if I'd call it a roadblock, but there is a lot of pre-alignment that has to be done early on. The simplest thing is if you go out and do the engineering design and do all the documents, you can just bid that out. It almost doesn't take any effort on my standpoint. So because I can go hire some engineering firm and say, this is everything I want delivered, simply go put all that in place. They deliver that engineering information. I can just pass that off to construction and go have it executed. But if I want to do this model, is a lot of upfront collaboration. So I have to get people together. I have to get them to see that vision and to see this is the partnership that's going to go on between the different groups in the room. And that's one of the pieces that's difficult. The other big piece is the whole, it depends on call it the reward contract piece of it. For us, it was very clear we wanted shared savings. We've done some lean IPDs also where we've just done straight T&M and we haven't really done the shared savings. And a lot of that's because a lot of our on-site contractors simply work on direct T&M with profit already built into it. So having the partner contractor, Spirit in this case, be able to basically, open their books and say, this is what our direct T&M cost is that we will charge you, okay? And that's what they invoiced us at. So, I mean, that's, part on their side to, say that they're willing to do that. Had this project not gone well and it took a lot of rework and a lot of time, we could have chewed through all of that contingency money, in which case P&G wouldn't have gotten a share. And we could have chewed through all of their profit line using their T&M such that when they got done, they could have billed us for all of that money on a T&M standpoint. And while we would have covered all of their direct costs, they could have walked away with zero profit. Okay. And this one, in case if we went beyond that, we actually would have added the T&M. So we weren't going to hold them accountable to a lump sum. But that was one of the concerns, is that, from their standpoint, is we got to make sure this goes well. So there was incentive for them, to do everything right and to do it right the first time. There was incentive for us too, because we wanted to share that savings and get money back from the initial contract. I've written hundreds of POs to construction over the years. And, as assuming the scope hasn't changed, and anybody can attest to this, you think back to how many of those POs did you write that you didn't go back and write a change order on, okay? There aren't a whole lot of them. And then if you think back, well, how many of those POs did I write where they actually didn't even spend all the money? I mean, it's even less. And so that was the whole challenge here. And the goal was to make sure that happened. So, and for something this large, the one last piece, we weren't going to hold them accountable to any major change. So if we made a huge change in the project, we would address that separately. But fortunately on this project, we came in with plan A, here it is, and we delivered plan A. So it didn't have a huge change where all of a sudden they said, oh, stop, we don't want to put this here anymore, we want to do something different. This one didn't have that. If you had that, that could be a whole nother, negotiating effort to figure out how does that impact where we are on this project. And this was this was an heavily take 9.5 month execution. So I had them on site here for 9.5 months, going through this process to do the major construction. Unfortunately, all of that went as planned.
Do you believe the approach is portable to other P&G projects?
Oh, absolutely. But once again, depends on the project. Okay. But I'd say that as I look at, having worked, projects for the last 30 years, I would say somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 to 70% of them that we do are adaptable to lean IPD. Now, to some form of it. I'd say less than 20% of them really fall into the heavy use of this effort to be able to develop partnership and do shared savings. Okay. To where you really focus on it. And the simple reason is a lot of the projects I don't think are big enough. If you're talking a 3-4 day outage for an effort, I'm not sure it's big enough to warrant what we had to invest up front to make it happen. So, but aspects of it for sure.
And then I have one more question for you, unless one comes in while you're answering this one. At what time did you bring Spirit on board for estimating and initial design and planning review during FEL3 or FEED or after funding approval?
We had contacted them prior to funding approval just to get to validate some of the numbers for installing a palletizer system, and that was based on some previous jobs. And they knew at the time that we were likely to bid them. And that was why they said, we'll help you. And I said, I'll make sure you get a bid when we do this process. But that was the extent of it after we funded. So it was actually during the funding when, through the hierarchy, when it started getting pushed, hey, can you do lean IPD? And my first question was, what's lean IPD? And I'd heard of it, but I'd never utilized it at all. And it was at that time, right after that, that we said, okay, well, if we do this, who are we going to select? Because, and I've worked with 3 or 4 other major construction companies doing this type of work that I thought could do that. But Spirit had been the one that was most heavily used for us. And so it became natural. And we said, okay, should we ask Spirit if they want to do this? And I said, I don't know if they've ever done it. I know they like to do lump sum jobs. So, that was one of their big things is they've always said, we'd rather do a lump sum job than a T&M. Not that they can't, but they felt like they could manage the effort better as lump sum. And so it was one afternoon and said, I had a few of us here talked and said, let's give them a call and see what they think. And, had a 15-minute call with them and explained it and showed them a quick layout and said, are you interested? And they said, we'll get back to you in a little while. And an hour later, they called and said, we'd be interested. And I think that was a combination of they had also said they had heard that other projects talking about that, and they had never done one before. But I think it was also a fact of, wait, this is work that you want to do. I think from that first call, it was probably the start of construction wasn't for probably 8 months. And to them, it was, oh, wait a minute, I can lock something in 8 months away, from this standpoint. I think they saw that as very beneficial. Like I said, most of the times we've bid them, we send a bid, we work through all the dynamics, and we're usually saying, well, construction starts in a month or 6 weeks. And so for a lot of companies that are already engaged in other projects, that becomes harder to say, where am I getting all the people? But when I gave them 8 months prep time, they said, yep, we know the right people. We'll make sure we get those people scheduled to be able to handle something like this. And so once again, that was a key piece of the partnership that they saw as an opportunity. And I probably didn't realize it at the time, but looking back on it now, I realize that's one of the things around why this works so well.
Great. Dave, thank you for all your time and the thorough answers for all the questions. And thank you everyone else for providing all those questions and making it an engaging Q&A session.